Good evening, first of all, and welcome. So, yeah, as Colette sort of said, Burgundy, Pinot Noir for me is probably what I would consider the most majestic grape that's possibly cultivated, particularly on the red side anyway, and Burgundy certainly has a huge interest for me. So I thought we'd talk a bit about Pinot Noir. We'll discuss the grape first of all, a little bit about where it's grown, where it's cultivated, and then we've got 4 wines which we're going to go through from various different regions, which, as Colette mentioned, makes up our Pinot Mixed Case, which is great value. We've got 12% off the normal cost if you buy the mixed case, and spring and summer is the perfect time to be popping bottles of Pinot Noir because it's on that lighter side. You can get ones which are a little bit more full-bodied and masculine, which we'll have a little talk about. But yeah, now's an excellent time to do so. So Pinot Noir, what's so special about Pinot? I think as a variety itself, it's pretty noble, mainly because the characteristics that it provides. Now, these characteristics will change depending on which region the wine is produced and the grapes are grown. Burgundy is the sort of the spiritual home, if you like, of Pinot Noir, and there you tend, where they've been growing for hundreds and hundreds of years, you tend to get more sort of fresh style of Pinot, a little bit more crunchy fruit, a very mineral and herbaceous style. And then if you look around the world, where we will be exploring today with New Zealand and Chile in the New World, you tend to get riper, sweeter styles, less of that herbaceous, and you tend to get that sweeter character coming through. And for me, what kills a great Pinot is when you get that sweetness from the fruit combined with a beautiful, sort of quite seductive perfume. So from moving on from there, Pinot Noir is, we should highlight, it's a very, very fickle grape. It's a very tricky and expensive grape to cultivate. And this is quite often the reason in a restaurant list or when you're buying wines for home, Pinot Noir will normally be towards the top part of the budget. But I do implore you, do explore. And this mixed case actually will give you great opportunity with various different price points. So we're starting with sort of a £9.95 going up to just £17 a bottle here. So here is a good range to have a look at. Why is it expensive? It's very thin-skinned as a grape variety goes. If you look at Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, next to Pinot Noir, you've got a big size difference in the berries. But then if you take a closer look, you'll see there's more thickness of skin, more pigmentation in Cabernet Sauvignon than there would be in Pinot Noir. So when you take Pinot Noir, therefore growing it can be quite tricky. It can be completely ruined from various different climate, sort of rain, frost, hail, anything sunburn can completely destroy a crop quite easily, which for some reason can be a little bit of the attraction with Burgundy, because Burgundy is a very continental climate. You've got these very, very cold nights and warm, hot summers, and in between those growing seasons, you can come across various different weather patterns in terms of frost and hail predominantly, which seem to be rising more frequently during the growing season. However, so you've got it's a very expensive grape to cultivate, but it also has to be hand-picked. With these thin, delicate berries, these beautiful berries, you need to be able to prune them off, pick them, and then make the wine from them rather than machine harvest. So all of this adds labour cost. So this continues to add eventually to the bill of the producer, the domain, the winemaker, whichever estate is producing these beautiful bottles. Eventually they need to obviously look after their overheads and make a margin themselves. But when it's done well, it's, for me, as I mentioned, the most majestic red wine you can get. So the 4 wines we've got, and if you have already bought the case and you may be tasting along, I'll just run through the names and the order which I will be tasting them in. So we'll be starting with a red Burgundy from Domaine Sirot-Boutiot, the Bourgogne Pinot Noir 2016. We'll be then moving on to the Chilean producer, which is Luis Felipe Edwards, Agua Santo, which is the 2017, I think, 2018, sorry, Reserva. Then we've been La Tunella, which is from Friuli in northern Italy, the Pinot Nero, 2017. And then 2019, obviously the growing season is different in New Zealand and harvest times are different, they're sort of March. We've got the 2019 Eridus Pinot Noir, which we'll finish on. Now, the reason, very briefly, I've sort of selected this order is to go from the sort of the more traditional, cooler climate, if you like, with Burgundy, where you would get a little bit more crunch in the fruit as we go through the tasting. And then with the Agua Santa, actually, this is a Chilean Pinot, but it definitely pays homage to Burgundy. It pays roots to the home of Pinot, and I'll touch on that a little bit more when I taste the wine. Then moving into La Tunella, northern Italy, where all of a sudden now you're getting a little bit more warmth during that sort of spring, the flower time, and then certainly into summer and during the ripening period pre-harvest, which you'll pick up a little bit more of that riper berried fruit. And then to New Zealand, to Atawa Valley in Marlborough, where you'll probably, I think, pick up the most sweeter sort of fruit character out of these four particularly. So wine number one, Domaine Siro Boutiot. We've been working with them for quite a long time now at Corny and Barry. So this is their Bourgogne Pinot Noir. So entry level, if you like, for a Burgundy estate starts with a Bourgogne Pinot. It can then go down to a village. Now, the village that these two brothers, Marc Emmanuel and Olivier, are based in is Pommard in the Côte de Beaune. Then you go up to a Premier Cru and then a Grand Cru. But we're a big lover of this wine for quite a good reason. There's value to be packed in here. So these you may have read on the website if you ordered it already, but this wine itself used to be part of the Pommard classification. Now the Burgundian law was, in terms of delineation of the vineyard zones, was moved in the 30s, and it got slightly moved, not far at all, in fact across a road, where this now has become Bourgogne Pinot Noir grapes. So historically, these were considered great prized vineyards, and they still are. And it's made in a traditional way. Again, I'll mention, so it's destemmed, so it's all hand-picked. So they pick the wines, the grape, and then they crush it, they take them completely off the stem, and then they vinify this in cement tanks, which is a very traditional Burgundian method. The Burgundians obviously love oak and use oak, but they want it as a very supportive measure. And it's just there to add an extra layer, just to give it a little bit more complexity to a wine. Where you might find some producers in USA, for example, California, where they may even barrel ferment some of their Pinots because they prefer a very richer style, but the sweetness of the fruit harvested in that northern hemisphere sunshine can certainly put up with a little bit more oak presence. Where with Burgundy, I think you want the elegance and want the refinement from there. So they do it in cement, and then when they age the barrel, they then transfer it 50% into old wood. Again, just to part a bit of spice, but mainly to let oxygen seep into these barrels to soften the tannins. And then the other 50% is in stainless steel. And then they blend it, and then they sort of age out about 10 months, bottle it, send it over to us, and then we try to sell to you good sales. So on a tasting note, 2016, first of all, is a very good vintage for Burgundy. So straight away here, on the Pinot Noir spectrum, when I put my nose in, I definitely get a sort of a cooler climate sort of feel. There is a sort of a red fruit, but also a little crunchy dark berry as well, with a tickle of spice. But at the back, you're getting a little bit of a floral note just coming through too. So 16, why 16 is such a good vintage? Because it's a juicy vintage. Now on the palate, you're getting those hints of sort of strawberry. You're getting a little bit of sort of black plum coming through, but it's all about acidity and freshness. And the mouth is just tingling. And you've got the salivary glands are just sort of sparkling away because you've got that acidity coming through and giving this wonderful sort of fresh character to lift the wine. And for me, that's why I think Burgundy certainly has a lot of people would class as their mecca. But it's good to pay homage because they've been doing it for so long that they pack in this freshness which lifts the Pinot Noir in the final product. Now, people do this very well also around the globe, which we'll obviously have a taste of momentarily. But here as well, there's a lovely finish. There's a purity on the fruit. There's a brightness of fruit, and it lingers. And for me, that's the hallmark really of a good wine. And balance is the key. And we'll talk about balance as we go through the wines here. There's a slight herbaceousness as well, which adds another weave to the tapestry. So on to Chile, with the Agua Santa. So this is the Luis Philippe Edwards, which is a family that we've worked with on other wineries. But here we're in the Colchagua Valley, which is actually the heart of Central Valley, which is one of the major Chilean wine regions. This estate, the beauty of this is you've got height, you've obviously got old mountains just on the doorstep, but then you've also got the Pacific Ocean just next door. And only 18 miles away from the vineyard, have you got the breeze of the Pacific Ocean crashing into this vineyard. The benefit of this is to keep those nights cool. And when you've got coolness during the growing season, particularly when the grapes have set and they're ripening, that helps retain fresh, vibrant acidity, which is what Burgundy does, albeit a different climate. But here, where you've obviously got heat in Chile, you've got altitude and that proximity to the ocean to sort of counteract that, perceived heat in your head of, South America. So I think if we briefly on the wine, so again, this is destemmed. They use a little bit more oak, and they use a little bit more new oak here. With the French one, it was 5 years old, and here I believe it's 3-year-old barrels for 6 months. So you'll feel a little bit of a different flavour profile starting to creep in on the palate. So if we have a smell. So what I like here is the combination of Pinot fruit and the sweetness there, but there's a savoury character here, and that comes from the sort of the cooler overall picture I've just painted of this vineyard. So you've got a slight, almost sort of earthy, leathery character creeping through, and with bottle age, that will go to an even more sort of like mushroomy sort of style, but not in a bad way, because you'll still have that fruit just absolutely backing it up. So more of an ingredient in a recipe. You've then at the back got this lovely, again, perfume lifted, just coming out of the glass, which for me is why Pinot is so brilliant. And it's obviously one thing I haven't commented on that I need to is the appearance of Pinot Noir in the glass. It's beautifully pale, it's ruby in its youth, and with age, you get a much more sort of tawnyish colour sort of creeping in, but it takes a long time for that to sort of dissipate. I think this is a brilliant hallmark again for Pinot for texture, and texture with Pinot Noir is crucial, because yes, it's thin skin, but that skin does pack in a lot of tannin when you make the wine. And you can have some Pinot Noirs which are made in a certain way, which will leave you completely, the gums of your mouth almost sort of feel like they've been assaulted with tannin, but then luckily you have that acidity to cut through and move it away. Here, when you get the perfect balance of soft tannin with sweet fruit, it gives this sort of silky texture to the wine. And I have to say, hats off. I'm going to give a little bit of a game away. There's 2 wines here which I've never tried before until today, and this is one of them. And I have to say, I'm very impressed. Yeah, so along with that wonderful sort of textured silkiness, again, you've just got this wonderful pep of acidity. The freshness just keeps alive. And this fruit here for me is much more red berried, red fruited, that sort of cherry, summer berry, with now the savoury element versus the nose for me is a little bit more downplayed. It's a sort of a secondary fiddle to the orchestra of the fruit, which is parading away. And then you have a little trickle of spice. So all in all, for the money, I think that is exceptional. And very difficult to find a Pinot Noir, I think, of that level for that price. So bravo to Rebecca and the team for finding these guys, who are our buyers. La Tunella. So now from Chile. So the reason I sort of started with the Burgundian wine was because I feel you've got a little bit more of a tauten palate there. This would definitely benefit with a couple of years bottle age, because I think it would, encourage the fruit to come to the front a little bit more. And there's also that tannin just needs a little bit more softness. We've then got the combination of a little bit of that sort of old school savoury character, but coming in with that beautiful New World ripeness, but at no expense of acidity and no expense of that nod to the Old World. So then with La Tunella, I think we're going to get a little bit more fruit here now, but you'll retain a crunch. By no means are we going full jam monster here. This is still going to be a wine which has balance and has finesse. So La Tunella, so we're in Friuli, northeast of Italy. This is owned by the Zorzetic family and has been since the 60s. They sort of I think, sort of had a bit of a game plan in the 80s or early 90s, sorry, I think it is, to sort of really focus on the vineyards they have. They did some replanting, and they decided then they actually wanted to focus on some more quality focused measures, so slightly different winemaking techniques alongside different viticultural techniques as well. It was renamed to La Tunella after the family in 2002. So here, soil types I haven't touched on yet, which is probably a good point. With Burgundy, it's about chalk and limestone. It's that calcareous style. Then with the Agua Santa, you've actually got a more granitic sort of style of vineyard of soils going through the valley, which fits with the topography and the actual landscape. And then with La Tunella, here it's a continental climate, but it's got sort of calcareous topsoil, and then you've got that marl underneath. So these are very, very similar features that you'd have with Burgundy. So let's have a smell. Yeah, so for me, you've got a darker fruit profile here already on the nose, slightly. So there's a combination of those red fruits, but there's sort of plum and even, almost like a really light cassis, like almost blackcurrant leaf as well. Because there's an aromatic style and there's a very pretty perfume there. And I think that's a word that's used a lot with Pinot Noir, and it's one that I definitely think works brilliantly. Is prettiness. It's a pretty style. I think here as well, you can feel potentially a little step up in body as well. It feels there's a slightly bit more weight. That could be a vintage character. Obviously, the growing season will contribute to the levels of acidity, if it's cool, if it's wet. If it's a warm year, that will contribute to the ripeness of the wine, the sweetness of the fruit, the potential alcohol in the wine, but also the tannin and the structure. And here, it feels that there's a little bit more weight than what we've just been tasting, in a very, very pleasant way, because there's a ripeness of fruit, but then there's this lovely crunchy, the fruit isn't overripe. It's got that sort of still crunchiness to it. So, you're hitting at the perfect moment. If you look at the apples you buy and we leave them in the fruit bowl, we're grabbing it where the skin still has that sort of juicy bite to it, rather than it's going over and the acidity sort of dropping. Again, with Pinot Noir, what is so brilliant about it is the grape is it translates the terroir, the French notion of that particular vineyard in that particular moment in time of that growing season, which will be the type of soil, it will be the type of weather it's had, it will be the decisions that were made by the viticulturists and how the grapes have been cultivated. And then when it's made, and if it's made, which most people do with Pinot Noir, to reflect in a simple way, i.e. not intervening too much in the winery, you get this sense. And here, the terroir, there's a mineral vein running through here as well. You can feel that almost chalkiness, which is certainly reminiscent for me of a riper Côte de Beaune vintage. So if you look at where the wine number one was from in Pommard, and maybe you look at sort of the surrounding or Beaune itself, the town, and their Premier Cruise, where you get this lovely red fruited style, but there's a chalkiness to it. And that chalkiness gives a drive to the wine. But with time in the bottle, it also gives pleasure because it adds another layer to what we're drinking. And after all, no one wants simplicity. We all want complexity deep at heart. Again, balance. The acidity is wonderful with that sweetness of fruit, but the crunch remains. And the length and the persistency just lingers. As you swallow, you still feel that taste. So I will talk a little bit about the final one, which is the Eredus Pinot Noir. So we're going over to New Zealand, the South Island, the northern part, so in Marlborough, which I'm sure everyone's very familiar of. It's predominantly known, excellent, I can see the Chapmans are on it, that's good work. It's predominantly known for its Sauvignon Blancs, which are, for me, Sauvignon, it can be very, very different. There's a huge variety of Sauvignons, to punchy, intense, aromatic, to sort of more fresh and resilient styles and more subdued. But here we're looking at the Pinot Noir, and without doubt you can get fruit from there. You can cultivate it brilliantly. But if you go down from the main plain of the Wiry Plain in Marlborough, you're down to the Attaware Valley, which is where we are with Eridus. You had a wife and a husband who went over from the Netherlands, and they set up, and they were called Har and Sophie Eridus. They found their home sort of 80, I think it's early 80s, 82 from memory, and then Michiel, their son, now has taken over the reins. And the beauty of here, you've got a small plot, and I think that's one thing, sorry, I didn't mention, is the vineyard size for Pinot Noir tends to be quite small. In the Bourgogne, it was 1.5 hectares, so tiny. Okay, with the Chilean size, a little bit longer, a little bit more, sorry, and you were looking at about, I think it was 10 hectares from memory. The Eridus Pinot were 3.5 hectares, so we're still small amounts. So these are not big production wines at all. And so this is why I think you get so much pleasure from looking at great family-owned estates that make Pinot, because they won't make a lot of it, and so you're getting wines that are just not very common. So with Michiel and Eridus, again, we're obviously quite close to the sea here, so that helps. We're very, very much limestone soil-based vineyards. So again, you're going to be getting these cool evenings, which is crucial for that acidity, and then these warm, lovely days that come through. It's stainless steel fermented, and then it sees 8 months in three-year-old French oak. So again, just to add that sort of layer coming through at the end. But if we have a smell first of all. Yeah, so this is, for me, it's got the most sort of prominent fruit profile. You've got this wonderful combination of floral lift coming out of the glass, but then you also have raspberry, strawberries, but there's almost like a blueberry aspect right at the back in a very, very small way, very, very small way. It just adds that kaleidoscope of fruit that's coming through. And then you've got a little bit of clove, and you've got this hint of sort of almost like a deeper spice alongside a sweeter sort of cinnamon-esque spice as well. Now this is one of the wines I have had before, because I'm drinking lots at home. I think it's a beautifully crafted Pinot Noir. It's serious. The 19 here, you can feel there's still a youth to the wine. So on the palate, you have that sort of red fruit coming through. There's almost like a cranberry and a pomegranate crunch here, which comes onto the palate, which bursts through with that acidity, and you get that sort of almost like hint of sort of sourness through with that ripe fruit, for me, which adds a refreshing element when you get that acidity coming through too. Texture again, I mean, you've got that textural mid, and then the finish, again, you have that sort of mineral drive. So for me, mineral representation is again, is very apparent in the Eridus. And then this is like a fourth layer now that we've got. So overall, our mouth is just juggling all these flavors and settling after a while with a lovely finish, which is just going to give pleasure. And that's what we want with wine. We don't want simplicity. At times, okay, there can be. And obviously when you drink wine on certain occasions, we've all been on holiday and we've gone somewhere to Turkey or Greece and sat there with our loved ones and had a glass of something local. At that moment in time, it tastes spectacular. You come back home and you spend a month trying to find it. You pull the cork and it tastes foul at home. We've all had that, and you've had those simple moments, but this is the opposite. This is where you've got this wonderful layered style of Pinot, which is going to continue to give pleasure. I'll be keen to see what the Chapmans think. Thumbs up, thumbs down. But double thumbs up, this is nice.
Well, thanks so much, Joe. It was more like a masterclass than an online tasting. Thanks so much.